Muchachos y muchachas, the other day RFK Jr. confirmed the horrible news that we all suspected, that the HHS indeed had a role in facilitating child trafficking.
We have ended HHS as the role as the vector, the principal vector in this country for child trafficking. And during the Biden administration, HHS became a collaborator in child trafficking and for sex and for slavery. And we have ended that, and we're very aggressively going out and trying to find these children, the 300,000 children that were lost by the Biden administration. And we are...
As far as any remediation or prosecution, it's ambiguous at the moment because there hasn't been any official plans that have been announced. However, in coincidental timing, Tom Homan, the new border czar, actually might have suggested something that might be on the horizon when it comes to sanctuary cities.
So the president signed an executive order just this week threatening to defund sanctuary cities for their policies. Why not just arrest the leaders who are harboring and shielding illegal aliens, actually terrorists, from deportation?
Wait to see what's coming.
Many are wondering the how. How did the HHS conduct or facilitate the act of letting all of these children into the country? So there's a whole process that is so complicated. I actually had to do a little research as to what the high level process of the children being processed in our system when they come over the border. As you guys may or may not know, I did a little time at the border a few years ago to observe this for myself, to see how children are coming over, with who they're coming over. And, you know, the process is very complicated, but of course, in my personal belief, I believe it was designed to be complicated so that way, you know, it makes it exhaustive for one to remediate this or to catch, you know, somebody who would facilitate this. But basically, a lot of these kids, migrant children, would come over with papers already wadded up in their pockets, and they would have sponsors that were already lined up for them. So they would come over the border, they would present this wadded up piece of paper, this folded piece of paper to Border Patrol, and then they would get processed. And I believe that they were actually processed out to these sponsors or these endpoints, and they were cross-national. They were everywhere, from every state, right? And I'm just going to flash this little piece of notebook paper up on the screen for you. This is, you know, how I figured that the process in which they were processing the children. Of course, there are a lot more intricate, complicated parts, I'm sure, but this is a high level process of how, you know, it goes from the child coming over the border and processed through HHS's ORR, which is representative, the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Now, when it came to the sponsors, basically even listed on their website, the criteria for sponsors for the ORR, like a person who was eligible to become a sponsor of these children, it was very lax. It could have been basically anybody. Unrelated sponsors, parents, legal guardians, immediate relatives, and distant relatives. So as you would imagine, you know, anybody could file for a distant relative or, you know, what have you to obtain one of these children. In fact, one HHS whistleblower actually came out with details that MS-13 gang members were applying for these children, and they were actually obtaining them. Some of them even with suspicions of sexual abuse, sex trafficking in their criminal past. In fact, former HHS Secretary Xavier Becerra was pushing staff to get migrant kids released to sponsors faster. He often referred the process as it should be working as efficiently as an assembly line. In this leaked footage, he's actually quoted whilst berating staff to work faster. And he's quoted by saying, if Henry Ford had seen this in his plans, he would have never become famous and rich.
If Henry Ford had seen this in his plans, he would have never become famous and rich. This is not the way you do an assembly line. And kids aren't widgets, I get it. but we could do far better than this.
Now, me personally, I have a bigger bone to pick with the HHS. Of course, it's under new leadership, so I'm really having high hopes that there will be some sort of remediation, some prosecution, some explosive reports coming out of this, because there have been a lot of corroded parts of our system that have been ongoing for centuries, right? And this is the thing. Like, I just want to side rant that a lot of people are they're very impatient when it comes to this administration that has been only instated for like a few months now, and they're trying to undo like a plethora of harm and a plethora of corruption that has been done to our system, to our republic. And so it's going to take a little time to do that, including investigations to truly root out all of the corruption. That's a little bit of my opinion of why it's going to take a little time for this to be undone. But once again, I'm having some hope that, with what we're seeing with Doge, uncovering corruption, with our tax dollars going towards NGOs that are doing corrupt things or not enough things, or straight up just embezzling these funds and frauding these funds. Anyway, there is a bigger piece to this that I think needs to be explored, and that's the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which Elizabeth Smart actually penned an article about this recently. April 29th is when this was published. And the headline reads, "America's National Human Trafficking Hotline is failing those who need it the most. There should be a federal reform," famous ex-victim says. And I completely agree. For those of you who don't know who Elizabeth Smart is, so in the early thousands, I believe this was in 2002, she was actually kidnapped from her home, and she was rescued 9 months later. So she was held captive for 9 months, and then she was rescued. She was actually spotted in the public with her captors, but still she was, that shows how much trauma bond was done on her. And so she is a stark advocate for things, anti-human exploitation, anti-human trafficking, things like this. So she brought attention to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and her article, I will link it in my description below if you guys want to read this, but it basically covers that the National Human Trafficking Hotline is not doing what they advertise to do. And we did a report on this 2 years ago with Counter Trafficking Alliance. I will link this page in my description as well, because I believe that this report is especially relevant in today's day and age, that, we've got, once again, agencies like Doge uncovering corruption, and the National Human Trafficking Hotline, I believe, needs to be in the spotlight. I think a lot of people need to look at them sideways and wonder why they have not been helping victims like they advertise to do so. So coming back to this article, she covers as a component that this hotline is actually supposed to refer tips to law enforcement. Why, you would ask? Well, law enforcement these agencies are going to be the organizations that will coordinate busts, stings, arrests, things like this. And it was actually 2 years ago that the National Association of Attorneys General actually penned a letter to congressional leadership, basically highlighting this problem, that the National Human Trafficking Hotline is not doing what they say they're doing. They're not referring tips to law enforcement. And this is one of the, I believe, the stipulations, or the one of the major pieces of criteria for them getting granted this $5 million annual grant by the HHS. Now we're going to get into something really sticky, because this is going to blow your mind. There's a big conflict of interest with that grant, or these grants. We're going to get to that. So I just wanted to show you guys. So this was penned February 27th, 2023. And let me just say this. Back then in 2023, there were 37 attorneys general that actually penned this letter to congressional leadership, and it was bipartisan. It was a bipartisan effort. This is huge. For a bipartisan effort, all attorney generals basically coming together and saying, hey, yeah, there's a problem with the National Human Trafficking Hotline. That is a pretty big deal. to the point where now it's not just 37, it's 41 attorneys general have now penned this letter to RFK Jr. saying the same thing. Hey, National Human Trafficking Hotline, hello, are not referring tips to law enforcement. And on top of that, they're getting this big grant yearly to do such a thing. So what are they doing with all this money, right? I don't know. That's a bigger question to answer. But basically, they penned a lot of concern. They penned it to RFK Jr. You're not going to hear this on mainstream media. You're not going to hear this by major journalists, because this is a big problem that once again is going under the radar. It's getting swept under the rug. Okay. Now let me get to the very sticky part. Now, there is a big conflict of interest when it comes to the HHS and some prior Polaris Project people. Let me just get to that part. Grants and partnerships. So this is part of the report. Now, if you scroll, there's a page called Grants and Partnerships, and it basically covers, the founders of this organization, Polaris Project, National Human Trafficking Hotline. Now, this is very remarkable, and I will link this also in my description below for you guys to read on your own time. If you are an audio visual learner instead, like you don't like to read, which I would argue that I am a better learner when it's a video or audio. I have a two-part series video that I made on YouTube. I will link that also in my description below. Watch it, because this covers basically this entire report. It's a 7-page report, and I put it in a video for you guys. So if you would rather watch this series and learn about how the National Human Trafficking Hotline is possibly failing these victims, which in my opinion they are, I'm going to link it. Please watch it and spread it. Please spread it, because it's so censored. It's crazy. But anyway, let me show you how conflict of interest this is. So this is Catherine Chan, the chick that you see in front of you. Catherine Chan founded the National Human Trafficking Hotline by finding the Polaris Project. Okay. So she found the National Human Trafficking Hotline. She left Polaris Project in 2012 to become the director of OTIP. Okay. That's under the HHS. Okay. HHS is an umbrella, and they have several little organizations, child organizations, OTIP being one of them. Okay. Now, one of her roles as part of OTIP is she is part of the HHS Administration for Children and Families, responsible for developing strategies and implementing programs to prevent trafficking, increase victim identification, and access to services, and strengthen the health and well-being of survivors. And part of this is another part of her role that we happen to stumble upon, but she basically oversees the budget, the grant budget. So she is in charge of millions upon millions of dollars, and she's in charge of deciding who gets this funding. Now, she's deciding this, and guess who gets some of the funding? National Human Trafficking Hotline, the organization that she left to become the director of OTIP and also the decider of these millions of dollars of grants. Okay? You see where the problem is here? So she's deciding where the grants go. Or she's at least one person who decides where the grants go. And this organization that she left is getting the grants. So do you see where the conflict of interest lies? Now, here's another sticky piece. Okay. Catherine Chan. So two Catherines, different Catherines. Catherine Chen is another Catherine. She is, or I believe that they recently changed out the CEO. So she's the recent CEO. She was actually selected by Alejandro Mayorkas himself, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas selected her to be part of the Homeland Security Advisory Council. Okay, she was the recent CEO for the National Polaris Project, National Human Trafficking Hotline. Do we see the big conflicts of interest here? So you've got actors, big leaders of the National Human Trafficking Hotline that are selected by the HHS to conduct roles and to, facilitate within their organization, also being also being attached to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is now, gaining some traction and some attention, some spotlight, that they're actually not doing so much for the victims, as it's opined by many people, including myself and my organization. Okay, so that is, in my personal opinion, that is a bigger bone that needs to be picked with the HHS, that they're not doing what they're saying that they're doing. And so I'm hoping that we can get a lot more spotlight on our findings in this report, because again, this is ongoing. This is the front line for human trafficking victims. They think they can call this hotline, get resources, get help, get rescued immediately, and that's not so much the case. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think about this whole thing in the comment section below. Please do visit if you don't have the time to read a 7-page report. I get it, but if you would rather consume your information through a video, I'm gonna link the 2-part series about the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Please watch it, please share it, because we're counting on organic shares now, because you know why. Share it, because it needs to be known that this organization, the HHS, is, they've been a big problem. So anyway, thanks guys for watching. I will catch you in the next video. Bye bye.